Chapter 10, Food Safety Management Systems, like HACCP, Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point. Food Safety Management Systems. What is a food safety management system? Well, it's defined as a group of practices and procedures intended to prevent foodborne illness. You know how people get sick from food by now, and these systems actively control risks and hazards throughout the flow of food. Well, there's really no way you could have food safety under control in a facility unless you had some foundational or prerequisite programs in place. Before you begin processing food, you might want to consider implementing some programs like a personal hygiene program, a food safety training program, a supplier selection and audit program, and a quality control program or quality assurance program. And you can develop policies for each of these areas to teach your employees how they need to act at all times, and it'll be easy for you to enforce those policies. Some additional areas that are vital to an operation as foundational systems would be a cleaning and sanitation program, an overarching standard operating procedure manual for all areas of sanitation, particularly being mindful of the main reasons that foodborne illness is caused, like buying from unapproved suppliers, like not cleaning and sanitizing properly, like not managing personal hygiene, and as well incorporate things like your facility maintenance and design, and of course, pest control. There are many ways to achieve active managerial control in an operation. According to the Food and Drug Administration, you can use simple tools such as training programs or manager supervision or the incorporation of SOPs. Regardless of how you choose to manage the food safety in your facility, you're going to want to make sure you focus on the 5 most common risk factors, as I mentioned in the previous slide. Number 1, purchase food from unsafe suppliers. Number 2, fail to cook food adequately. Number 3, holding food at incorrect temperatures. Number 4, using contaminated equipment. Number 5, poor personal hygiene. So if I were you, a food protection manager, leader, owner, I would begin to develop a set of policies to ensure my vendors are all approved and inspected by the reputable regulatory authority. I would inspect and check my cooking methodology to make sure it's up to regulatory requirements. I would ensure that my cold food is held at 41 degrees or lower and my hot food is at 135 or higher. I would even check the dry storage facilities and make sure that I'm controlling humidity and keeping the range between 50 and 70 degrees in my dry storage areas. I would ensure that I would have clean equipment by proper washing, rinsing, and sanitizing all my equipment prior to use, after use. And of course, I would incorporate strict personal hygiene policies, considering things like hand washing, uniforms, aprons, hair nets, hats, removal of jewelry, and of course, not coming to work sick. Once again, however you choose to achieve managerial control, could be, again, training programs. It could be you just making sure you have your hands in everything all the time. It could also be the incorporation of policies and procedures, holding people accountable for that. And then there is an extensive system called HACCP, or Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Point, to protect the food against the same hazards we know about: biological, chemical, and physical hazards. Regardless of the system that you choose, monitoring critical activities is mandatory, and then taking corrective action when required, and then making sure that the actions that you've taken take care of the food, and then also restore the processes that are vital to our operation. The FDA provides recommendations for food protection managers on how they might control the common risk factors for foodborne illness. One key thing is that a manager must be able to demonstrate knowledge and understanding. And how they might do that is by becoming a certified food protection manager. Another key area is that we have some staff health controls in place, such as procedures to make sure staff are practicing personal hygiene. Staff must know that they must report illnesses and illness symptoms to management. Another key factor is controlling hands and the use of bare hands, particularly with ready-to-eat foods. And instead of using our hands, let's put tongs and utensils in place or deli sheets. Another key factor would be, of course, time and temperature controls. Procedures that are in place to limit the amount of time spent in the temperature danger zone. You remember the temperature danger zone, 41 to 135. Require that food handlers check temperatures at least every 2 hours, leaving time for corrective action. And if you offer anything raw or undercooked, be sure to provide notices and clear statements about the risk of consuming these foods. There are many systems you can implement to achieve active managerial control. HACCP is one such system. HACCP is Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Point. It's based on identifying potential significant, introduced, or enhanced hazards. You know the hazards: biological, chemical, and physical. We really focus on the whole production method and the flow of food, being sure to understand each specific point. Therefore, we can eliminate, reduce, or prevent hazards throughout the production. For HACCP to be effective, it must be written based on each specific facility, considering that facility's menu, that facility's customer, the intended use of the food item, the equipment used to process it, storage mechanisms, transportation. All these things must be considered. One plan that works for one facility may not work for another. So each facility must conduct a hazard analysis on the food and how the food is processed. You know, by the time we've got this point in the lecture, you pretty much know what we're up against in this food safety thing. And you even know specific hazards and specific foods that have hazards associated with them. So it's not too tough to implement HACCP if you have a formula for success, that is. And the formula is to understand the 7 HACCP principles. And it would be a way to implement HACCP in a facility. Either if it was required or if it wasn't required, it could be used as a food safety management system. HACCP is required for specialized food processes. We'll get to those in a few minutes. But let's look at the 7 HACCP principles. Number 1, we conduct a hazard analysis. We look at the food being considered, all the ingredients. And then we consider the processing methods, or how we're going to prepare that food, all the ingredients. After considering that, as a food safety manager or food protection manager, you'll be able to determine which points in the preparation or production of the food and all its ingredients need to be controlled. We call those critical control points. After determining where we're going to control these hazards that are revealed through our hazard analysis, we must establish limits, or how we're going to remove, eliminate, or reduce these hazards to safe levels. That's called establishing our critical limits. After we establish these critical limits at these critical control points, after analyzing our food and processing methods, we'll need to establish some monitoring procedures to ensure that the critical limit's been met at the critical control point. After setting up these monitoring procedures, we hope that everything goes okay 100% of the time, but things occasionally will go wrong, and we'll have to have some corrective action procedures in place. Step 5 of the HACCP principles is to identify corrective action procedures. After step 5 comes step 6, and this is the point where the food protection manager and regulator or whoever's involved at looking at your system ensures that the system is working properly by verifying the system and its documentation, its critical limits, the science or regulation behind the limits, and the hazards that are being controlled. Are they effectively being controlled? And for a HACCP system to effectively work, it must have documentation and some procedures for record keeping. So step 7 is establishing a record keeping and documentation system. HACCP, Principle 1, conduct a hazard analysis. Identify the potential food hazards in the food served by looking how it is processed. Identify TCS foods and determine where hazards are likely to occur in each one. Look for biological, chemical, and physical contaminants. Be sure to prepare a flow diagram or process narrative for the food being considered. After analyzing the food considered for processing, you will probably determine some specific critical control points in the process. If we were looking at the production of chicken, we would identify for sure the hazard of salmonella. And now typically salmonella is controlled is by cooking. So we would find the cooking step and ensure that the process is managed. And continuing on with the chicken example and this HACCP system, we would analyze the chicken, find the potential hazard of salmonella. We know that the critical control point discussed last slide was cooking for salmonella. After establishing where we're going to control it, we must talk about how we're going to control it, or a critical limit. In the case of chicken and salmonella, to make it safe, we're going to cook that product to 165 degrees, and we're going to hold that product at 165 for at least 15 seconds to ensure the product is safe. To ensure that our critical limit is met, we are going to establish some monitoring procedures. And continuing with our chicken example, the best way to make sure that the temperature is met, the 165 for 15 seconds, is to use a thermometer and to have a timer available and to make sure that they're consistently met. And we're going to establish these monitoring procedures before we begin production and log and record those to make sure that we're effectively tracking these. When monitoring, occasionally we'll find shortcomings or positions in the production where we'll need to correct deviations. We'd like to predetermine these corrective actions if possible, but always train your staff and have them well trained enough to determine when food is unsafe and have the ability to take corrective actions. But in the case of the chicken, if the chicken wasn't 165 degrees, we would continue cooking it. We would then clean, wash, rinse, and sanitize our thermometer. After a certain amount of time, again, check the product temp. In case you forgot, we're looking at the 7 HACCP principles. We're on Principle 6. Principle 6 is to verify that our system is working. And we're going to have these pre-conducted process and programs in place. And then our job as a manager, food protection manager, is to check the logs, check that the thermometer is accurate, check that they have logs for the calibration of thermometers, ensure that our staff is trained and knowledgeable by asking questions regularly. This will be a system of verification. In the case of the chicken example, I would expect to see some kind of calibration log for the thermometer. I would expect to see some type of cooking log or occasional temperature check log on the line. And then that would be a system that we would go ahead and monitor those logs and make sure that things are being done the right way. Now, HACCP is not required for cooking chicken in a normal restaurant production. But it's a system we could surely implement to ensure that our chicken is safe. HACCP is going to be required for specialized processes, like varying from the food code extending the life of a product beyond 7 days by using ROP or acidification in some manner. But you could also want to hold fish in a display tank, or you might want to process your own meat that you've hunted. Now, these type of processes would require a variance, and a variance would require perhaps a HACCP plan from your local regulator. And for a HACCP system to be managed properly, it has to have documentation, which brings me to Principle 7, establishing some type of record keeping or documentation system. Well, I've talked a lot about these specialized processing methods that require a variance, and a variance may require a HACCP plan. And here are some of the processes that would require that. Smoking food is a method to preserve it, but not to enhance the flavor. Using food additives or components such as vinegar to preserve or alter the food so it no longer requires time and temperature control for safety. Curing foods and custom processing of animals. Here's a few more types of processing methods that require a variance and may require a HACCP plan. If you're packaging food using ROP or reduced oxygen packaging. If you're cooking via sous vide or vacuum packaging food or modified atmosphere packaging foods. These type of processes have the risk of Clostridium botulinum and Listeria. If you treat your own juice on site and package it for later sale, or if you sprout seeds or beans, these are considered processes that require a variance and or a HACCP plan. Putting the food safety principles you have learned into action can help keep food safe in your operation. However, despite your best efforts, a foodborne illness outbreak may occur. How you respond can make a difference in the outcome. To deal with foodborne illness outbreak, you will need a crisis management program. What was a foodborne illness outbreak again? Well, remember that's 2 or more people getting sick and calling your operation and complaining of eating the same food. So I would expect you to put together a crisis management team and build a program before you have the problem. This will help you deal with any possible outbreaks and recovery afterwards. A successful crisis management program has a written plan. The basic objectives of the plan focus on 3 parts: the preparation, response, and recovery. For each of these parts, the plan must identify the resources needed and the procedures to be followed. The time to prepare the plan is before the crisis. There is no off-the-shelf disaster plan that works for every operation. Each plan must be customized to the operation. A good way to make sure your plan meets your needs is to test the plan once it's complete. The results of the test will help you identify potential gaps of your program. You need to prepare for many types of crises. Example, foodborne illness outbreak, product recalls, water interruptions, power outages, sewage backups, and floods. The emergency contact list should include members of the crisis management team, management headquarter personnel, local regulatory authority, testing labs, police, and the fire department. The crisis communication plan must include list of media responses or questions and answer sheets suggesting what to say for each crisis, sample press releases that can be quickly tailored to each type of incident, a list of media contacts to call for press conferences or news briefings, plan for communicating with staff during the crisis. To prepare for a foodborne illness outbreak, develop a food safety program. Train staff on food safety policies and procedures. Create a foodborne incident report form. Get legal guidance when developing it. Train your staff how to use it properly. Your foodborne illness incident report should include the following: what and when the customer ate at the operation, when the customer first got sick, what the symptoms were and how long they were experienced, when and where the customer sought medical attention, and what other food had been eaten recently by the customer. When responding to a crisis, work with the media. Communicate directly with your key audiences. Examples are customers and stockholders, of course, and the direct community you serve. Fix the problem and then communicate what you have done. When responding to a foodborne illness outbreak, when 2 or more people get sick from eating the same food, take the complaint seriously and express concern. Complete an incident report form. Contact your crisis management team and the local health department, and follow your crisis communication plan, working with media, regulatory, and of course your suppliers and local customers. In the following slides, there are some if-then scenarios for how you might respond to a foodborne illness outbreak. If a customer calls to report a foodborne illness, then take the complaint seriously, express concern, do not admit responsibility, ask for general contact information, and complete the foodborne illness incident report. If there are multiple or similar customer complaints of foodborne illness, then contact the crisis management team. Identify common food items to determine the potential source of the complaint, and contact the local regulatory authority to assist in the investigation if any outbreak is suspected. If the suspected food is still in the operation, then set it aside. Ensure that it's not used by labeling it "do not use" and "do not discard." Log the information about the product, including the description, the product date, and lot number if available. If possible, obtain samples of the suspected food from the customer. If the suspected outbreak is caused by a sick staff member, then maintain a list of food handlers scheduled at the time of suspected contamination. Interview them about their health status and exclude the suspected staff member from the operation following the requirements. We've been looking at some if-then scenarios on how we might respond to a foodborne illness outbreak. Here's the last one. If the regulatory authority confirms your operation is the source of the outbreak, then cooperate with the authority to resolve the crisis. Provide appropriate documentation, including temperature logs, HACCP documents, and staff files as necessary. The final step in a crisis management plan is developing procedures to recover from a crisis. Let's take a look. To recover from a foodborne illness outbreak, investigate to find the cause of the outbreak, work with the regulatory authority to resolve issues, throw out all suspected food, clean and sanitize areas of the operation, establish new policies and procedures or revise existing ones based on new results or findings. Develop a plan to reassure customers that the food served in your operation is safe.